Today I'm going to be talking about things you should consider before switching to Android. Let's get into it. First things first is ecosystem. This is definitely a massive part of why people don't switch. And it's honestly one of those things that you consider because you have a lot of Apple products. For me, I personally have a MacBook, I have an Apple Watch, I have an iPhone, which I'm filming on right now, and I have AirPods as well. I'm pretty well integrated in the Apple ecosystem. But I've managed to switch away from Android before, and I've always come back. Now, this is the reasons why I've always come back. It's because when you leave the ecosystem, you can replace the products with Android counterparts, and they work fine. You just don't get the same software magic. You don't get the same little things that Apple does that you don't notice that add up over time. For example, your AirPods switching between devices is done so well. And yes, you have that on your Android counterparts, but it doesn't work as well because Apple own every bit of their software, whereas Android companies don't. Unless you're obviously Google, but Google don't do this as well. They don't have the same software engineering, and I think it's a case of they don't care enough. They don't want to put in the time and the effort to make these things happen. The ecosystem, when it comes to hardware, you notice it as well, because with Apple Watches and iPhones, they sync so well together. You don't even notice that they're linking together. You don't even notice that there's anything going on in the cloud, anything like that. All you notice is that it works. Whereas when I switch to Android, you're constantly thinking, oh, this is paired to my phone. Is it going to disconnect? Is it not? Is it going to connect today? Am I going to get my calls come through? And one thing I noticed is if I answered calls on my Pixel Watch, it would still keep ringing on my phone, which was really strange considering that they are meant to be communicating. But that's some things that just add up that don't work all the time, and you notice that when you go from the Apple ecosystem to an Android ecosystem. The second thing is iMessage. Now for me, this hasn't been a big deal, but when you live in America, this is a very, very big deal. Whereas in the EU, you do get people use a lot more services like WhatsApp, Messenger, Snapchat. It's a lot more common over here to use third-party messaging apps than just iMessage. But you do notice it. When you need to text someone and they're on iPhone and they use normal messaging app, it is really big letdown with what Apple let you do. You cannot react to their messages, you cannot send photos or videos over there without having to pay for them personally through your carrier. Your messages aren't end-to-end encrypted, and it's honestly a massive deal in a lot of security ways. It's not even just because you're a green bubble. It's a concern for your security, and you also lose out on features that you should get. I mean, Google have got the service. They've got RCS. They've got a service that works, that can work on both. Apple just don't want to adopt it. This has nothing to do with Android, and this is a solely Apple thing. Apple are gatekeeping this from their users and making sure that Android has a disadvantage. Now, this is through no fault of your own that this happened, and you can't change anything about that. It's on Apple's part. But on the Android side of things, when you do switch, you don't notice anything. You don't notice anything different. Your messages aren't green, they're a normal color, and it makes you feel like you're messaging someone normally. They can react to your messages and it will show up as a reaction. And it's honestly so nice to have that option. It makes you realize how integrated everything is to iMessage, and you notice that people start to get annoyed that you don't have iMessage. They say, well, why are you a green bubble? Why are you making my messages green? This happens, and it's really, really annoying because people do not understand that it's Apple that are holding people back from having the perfect group chat, having the perfect messages sending. It's honestly a real big annoyance. Now, definitely another thing is optimization is just nowhere near as good on Android as it is on iPhone. iPhone's optimization on every single type of app and just software in general is so much better. When I switched to Android, the first thing I obviously downloaded was Snapchat. I use it, I'm young. And it lags. The camera opens and yeah, it looks nice in Snapchat, but when you try and swipe over to your messages, everything opens delayed because it's processing all of the stuff that's going on in the background with the camera, and it doesn't help. When you open Instagram, everything is just bigger than it needs to be, whereas on iPhone it isn't. Cameras aren't optimized, apps don't run as smooth, and it's so obvious. App manufacturers do really not want to make their optimizations for Android because there are so many Android phones out there that you cannot just give special treatment to one different company. Now, it's very difficult because these companies can compete. Samsung, Google, they can compete in terms of the camera area, and they can compete in terms of processing power in some ways. But they just don't do it. Now, Samsung obviously has tried this. They've tried paying companies to do this, and it works, but they just don't put the same dedication in as they do with the iPhone, because there are so many more people on iPhone that use these features that it just makes more sense. It's quicker, there's less iPhones to worry about than there is Android counterparts. And it obviously is a big thing for app manufacturers to do, to have a team to sit there to go through all of the Android phones and make optimizations for them. It's just physically impossible. And in the Android software, you notice that things aren't as optimized. Swipe gestures are nowhere near as thought through as they are on iPhone. Everything is a bit more clunky, everything's a bit slower, everything's a bit more janky. And doing multiple things on your phone at once is meant to be a massive multitasking thing on Android. It's meant to be a massive win. But I just don't see the same dedication and the same processing power getting used for making multitasking good. Whereas on iPhone, you can have picture-in-picture running and you can have an app running and it works well. Whereas on Android, I can definitely notice that it's struggling. And this is mainly because Android uses a lot more RAM than iOS does. And most Android phones have to have way more RAM to be able to handle all the tasks that are going in the background. And it just means that your CPU is focusing on channeling through all these different things that are going through RAM at the same time. And it's very, very difficult because Android sucks battery and sucks processing power, and it's honestly such a shame, because if these companies could find a way to make their own software, have Android as optimized as possible, then definitely Android could be better than iOS. Another thing that kind of links into optimization is the processor. Apple make their own processors, which means that they can do anything they like in the software, and they can make your software link well with your hardware and make everything integrate really nicely. This is why they can get ridiculous hours of battery life with a smaller capacity than you can on Android. It's just the reason why. I also have the new A17 Pro, which has ray tracing built into it, and it's also really impressive, and it does battery life well. It does get a little bit toasty, but it's all right. And it also does have a lot more power for the tasks it needs. It also uses less RAM. Now, this isn't noticeable at first. You don't notice it when you're just scrolling through the UI. But when you open third-party apps, those Android processors start to chug because the optimization isn't there. They haven't optimized the apps to run for those processors, so it's slow. And you notice it, and the phone's starting to lag. And when you swipe up, it lags, it judders, because you're using all your power on your chip for that app. Now, you may not think this is a big deal, but I have had two Android phones in the past. I've had a Google Pixel 7 Pro and a Samsung S22 Ultra. I also had a Huawei, which was the best Android phone I ever had because the processor was made by them. They could integrate it with Android and it worked well. But whereas Samsung, at the time I was using an Exynos chip, which is absolutely awful, and I really hope they do not go back to that. And on the Google Pixel 7 Pro, I was using the G2. And the G2 is already throttled on it as it is on power. It really is noticeable. The power isn't there to power these apps. It is around the UI and it is when you use Google, but it's not there for apps. Samsung, the Exynos chip, it just struggled in every single task. Using Google, using the UI, using third-party apps, using the Google command really made the phone chug. Having music on, doing another task, made it chug. And it's just because these third parties do not optimize their apps as well as they do for iOS. Even some Android apps run better on iPhone than they do on Android. It's just because more people use iPhone. And it's just that thing of Apple have the processors and the hardware and the software that can all link well together and can all play friendly. Whereas on Android, we don't have that. Other than Google, we do not have that happening at all. So do take that into account. Your processing power and your way you use your phone completely changes. Another thing definitely has to be updates. It is so much more obvious now than ever that Android is really trying to compete with Apple with their updates and try and make them better and better and better and make them have longer software support than Apple. But it still isn't the same thing, because Android pushes out their updates and it doesn't go to every single Android phone at the same time. Even if it's the same make, model, everything, it doesn't get rolled out at the same time. And you do notice that, whereas with iOS, there is so much more hype around the new iOS version, and every single phone that is supported on that version gets that software update the same time, the same day, all around the country, all around the globe. And it's honestly really good, because they can control this. They can make everyone have the same software version, the same security patches as everyone else has. And it's a nice thing to see. You don't see it on Android, and everything gets pushed out later and later, depending on which device you have, which serial number you have on your device. It all depends on multiple different things. And you really do notice it, because you notice the fact that other people have got the update before you, and you're still stuck with the older version. When you try and check for the update, it's still not there. It's honestly a really big annoyance, and one thing Android should definitely try and fix and definitely try and sort out to get all the updates pushed out across all their phones at the same time. Battery life. Now, you will definitely notice that when you switch to Android, your battery life drains quicker. Now this may seem a bit exaggerated and you see all these battery tests. Your battery is, once you start using it for texting, Instagram, Snapchat, camera, using it for just normal tasks, you notice your battery is just dropping way quicker than it does on iOS. Now, this could be because you have a defective unit, or it just could be your phone isn't good on battery life compared to iOS. iOS is so much more battery efficient and you notice it so much more. Now, I definitely say if you are getting an Android phone, make sure you get one that's got a massive battery. Make sure you got one that's, been tested and you see that the results on YouTube and you watch multiple different videos, because I definitely say if you watch multiple different videos on different people's experiences with that one phone, you get an overall picture on what someone had and someone else had, and then you can combine those two things together and go, yeah, I want to buy this Android phone, or this one seems better for me. Definitely do take that into consideration, because it's a really good thing to get multiple different people's perspective. If you go just for one tech channel that's had one phone, you don't get the same perspective. So make sure you're watching multiple different people's videos to make an overall conclusion. But yeah, definitely battery is way worse on Android. One other thing I just throw in here is MagSafe is definitely a big thing now. A lot of people use MagSafe without even realizing it. Their phone holders, their wallets on the back, phone cases, MagSafe pucks. Now, there is a new standard called Qi 2, but a lot of Android manufacturers just don't use it for some reason, even though a lot of people really like it on iOS. So if you are a massive fan of MagSafe, definitely do not switch to Android, because you're going to notice that it's not there. If not, you can get a lot of cases that have MagSafe built in. It's just not the same as having it on the default phone. One other thing that iOS is absolutely the king of is video. When you film a video on a phone, it's so much more crisp, clear, colors pop, and Android just doesn't have that. Android is catching up, but at the moment, iPhones take the best video on all smartphones. That is definitely without a doubt, and you notice it when you compare Android video to iOS video. It's also, you can film for the longest amount of time, you can also make the colors look better, whereas on Android everything's a bit more flat, everything's a bit more laggy. You can only film for a certain amount of time sometimes because the phone gets too hot trying to process everything, and a lot of companies can't use their processing magic after the video's done. So it is definitely a massive advantage for Apple having the best video out of all the phones, without a doubt. The last thing I definitely have to say is call quality is definitely nowhere near as good on Android as it is on iPhone. Now, I think this is just because Apple does a lot more optimizations. If you have an iPhone, they definitely try and make it a lot crisper, a lot better to hear. And now with this new feature coming out where you can basically block out anything that's in the background, it's definitely a massive advantage for Apple for call quality. You have FaceTime, you have better phone call quality. What more could you want? Now, when you are thinking of switching to Android, do take into account that you do have a different calling system, you have Wi-Fi calling, and you also have to depend on your carrier, because your carrier is also a massive reason why your phone quality calls can be as good, but I definitely would say that Apple's are better overall. Now, to conclude, if you are thinking of switching to Android, definitely take the things that I said into consideration. I've been in both parts. I've had Android phones, I've had iOS phones, and I personally really do enjoy both. I get different things out of different Android phones, and I get different things out of iPhones. If I could have it my way, I'd have an Android phone and I'd have an iPhone. I like the customization of Android and I like some of the things that they do, but I just like having a smooth experience on iOS. Nothing I have to worry about. Everything works and runs even on my iPhone 14 Pro Max. It's been Harry. I'm out. Peace.